So we're going to be voting soon, as you know. So I want to start out with a little story, if you don't mind. I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and I went to St. Philomena grade school. And in first grade, my first day in class, Sister Jean assembled us and said, now I want you all to take out your construction paper and your crayons. Remember, I gave you those things. And I want you, for 15 minutes, each of you, to draw a picture of a famous person. Then you're all going to stand up in front of the class and talk about famous people. So I did Eddie Matthews, who was the third baseman of the Milwaukee Braves, where they belonged in Milwaukee, not in Atlanta, as you know. It's in the Old Testament somewhere. And so I'm supposed to use this. So after 15 minutes, put your crayons down. But a fellow across the hall from me, Patrick Monroe, he kept drawing his picture. And finally, Sister Jean, Patrick, put your crayon down. It's time, you know. And he said, I've got to finish it. I've got to finish it. To which she said, well, what could be so important? Well, who are you drawing? And he said, oh, I'm drawing a picture of God. To which she said, no, Patrick, no one knows what God looks like. To which he said, they will in a minute. Now, no one understands the Electoral College, but you will in a minute. Okay, so we're going to go through a lot of slides here for your listening enjoyment. So this is a Philadelphian. It's not too far. What is that, 75 miles from here?
30.
That's it? That's it? Jeez. It's a suburb.
You can ride it in a night on a horse.
I don't know about that. I think he's riding. He's retired in Boca, isn't he?
He finally had to move out of Delaware.
Okay. Law and liberty cannot actually become the objects of our love until they first become the objects of our knowledge. That's why you're here tonight. Civic education, understanding things is very important. We had two revolutions. One against the Brits, right? Better terms now. And that was the Declaration of Independence, the most important political document ever in the history of the world, which is we're endowed by our Creator. You know, when people say, you know, we're an exceptional nation, and Barack Obama said, well, every country thinks they're exceptional, but we know we're exceptional because we think we get our rights from our Creator. I've been to 68 countries. I haven't been any other place that thinks that. Everybody else thinks the Parliament or Mr. Xi creates their rights. The second was the U.S. Constitution, which was, we went from a confederation, Delaware was a part of it, of course, to a more serious union because, in part, we were surrounded by all those Europeans. So it's the world's oldest constitution, as it turns out. Cornell University Law School did a study of constitutions around the world, and the average constitution has lasted 17 years. The French are on their fifth, as you know, the Fifth Republic, since 1789, since our constitution on their fifth was the same one. The Italian is a little bit older, and ours is 238 years. Why? So what we're going to talk about is why that design has been successful, and others have not, right? Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see, because nobody had a constitution until we had ours. No country had one. Now, there's a few lessons that I'm going to try to share with you. And one is, and if we understand this, we understand the founder's mindset, which is our nature is broken. We are all flawed people. We need forgiveness and redemption all the time. And this is why we need each other, because we are imperfect. But of course, the Old Testament talks about good and evil. So the founders, they read their Bible and they knew that people were problematic. We talk about the Electoral College tonight and why the founders created it. People say, well, it's undemocratic, that it's a voter suppression. Remember that this is the Bush v. Gore, and that's the Clinton versus Trump. That the majority should always rule. The majority should always rule. We hear a lot, save our democracy, to which I whisper, save our republic. It's a very different thing. Democracies are all about the majority always rules. Republics say there's got to be temperance to that. There has to be minority rights or we will have tyranny. Right? So the American Revolution, 1776, we were surrounded by the French, the Spanish, and the British, of course, were running things here in America. And what Hamilton said, of course, in Federalist, I think it was 27, the Europeans fashioned themselves the mistress of the world. Don't you love that? There's Hamilton, the immigrants saying the Europeans. So the reason I have this slide is because when I first started, this is my 187th time giving this speech. And when I first started it, I used to start in Philadelphia in 1787, and then college students would say to me, well, the founders didn't give women the right to vote, or they invented slavery in 1619. And so I have to start much earlier because we have a bunch of cut flowers out there with no roots, right? So in 1776, all the world had was tyranny, slavery, and poverty, and liberty nowhere ever. What I would say to the students is, women never in the history of the planet had voted in 1776 anywhere. And they couldn't believe it. They thought surely in France the women were voting. But no, they weren't. They were making wine. Okay, so these were some of the rulers in 1776. They have much better outfits than we had. Charles III, one of the better dressed guys here, Louis XVI. Of course, he was beheaded. George III, that's who we defeated in our... But also slave markets in the Roman Empire, and there were slave trade routes in the Middle Ages. The tribes were buying and selling. They were capturing people, and of course, the Egyptians had slavery. Probably 10 to 15 million people from Africa were moved across the Atlantic to both South and North America. The Brazilians didn't get rid of slavery until 1888, which is what, 23 years after our Civil War ended. What I'd like to point out to students is all these people that were sold to the Europeans were sold to them by African tribes who would capture their enemies, and rather than kill them, they would make money from them. The point is, throughout history, we've had slavery everywhere, all the time. It's in the Old Testament, it's everywhere, and it's original sin for everybody, not just for the Westerners. It's a problem that, ask the Uyghurs today in China if they're slaves in China. I think they would say, if they were allowed, they would say yes. Our founders studied history. And as you know, if you don't know history, you'll always be a child. That's what Cicero, so that's why you're here tonight. Now this is D.C. before they put the metro. Our roots are deep in Western civilization, and starting with the Greeks, right? The Greeks, great food. This is Socrates, here he is, on trial by 300 jurors, his fellow citizens, after the Peloponnesian Wars because it ended badly for the Athenians against the Spartans, and he was asking questions of the youth. He was sort of an itinerant teacher because they didn't have formal schools. Matter of fact, his student, Plato, invented the whole idea of the university. Other than that, schooling was done by parents. And the jury decided to kill him for asking questions of the youth and doubting the decision by Pericles and others to go to war. So here's Plato. This is this wonderful picture painting painted in 1787. So while our founders in Philadelphia writing the Constitution, David, this painter, is painting this picture the same summer. It's really a wonderful a part of our history, if you will. And what Plato learned by having his teacher killed for asking a question is that human nature is broken, always has been, always will. So that's the first lesson, which is they really, from early days, understood man is a problematic creature. Plato writes a book called The Republic, where he talks about different ways to run countries. And in chapter 8, he writes, tyrannies naturally arise out of democracies. So it's lesson number 2, right? Which is, he witnessed that because if you read Plato's Apology, his story about his reporting about the trial of Socrates, you know that this this man was really innocent of doing anything that would be a death penalty warranted, but his number one student was Aristotle, who wrote a book called The Politics. And in it, he struggled with this question of why democracies always become tyrannies. And briefly, he comes up with the idea we have to have a mixed regime, a king, aristocracy, and the citizens, sort of early ideas of checks and balances. The Romans read this book, and they have a Caesar, a Senate, and the Republican Assembly. So the Romans take them to heart, and here's the schematic of the Roman Republic, which is the division of power. I mean, it was not exactly like ours, but it was a similar idea. And yet here we have in the Old Testament, 400 years before Aristotle, God is the judge, the lawgiver, and the king. The three branches in the Old Testament, 400 years before Aristotle, came up with that idea. So there's nothing new under the sun because our nature continues to be the same. It doesn't change. The Romans had the Republic, and then Caesar was assassinated by the Senate, Brutus and others, as you know the story. They wear the Ides of March, and they became an empire. And of course, the founders wanted to avoid that. The reason DC looks like this is because our founders wanted to have a successful republic, as the Romans had for a long time. Of course, we've pretty much outlived them now, I guess you would say. Now, the University of Houston did a study of 15,000 speeches, letters, correspondence, notes and writings of the founders, and they pulled out 3,154 quotes from the founders, not just these men, but John Jay and others, Dickerson and the rest. And they found that there were four main citations, if you will. Number 4 was the second treatise, which is Locke. This is where Jefferson gets his idea. We're endowed by our Creator with the rights of natural law. And that after he wrote this, he had to flee England. He went to the Netherlands because the king wanted to take his hat off. And about 2.3% of the quotes are from Locke. The number 3 quoted book was the Commentaries on the Laws of England by Blackstone. Number 2 was Montesquieu's, the great Montesquieu, Spirit of the Laws. He had spent 20 years studying democracies and why they fail. He wrote this book when the founders were very young, 1748, and all the founders read this, and this was 8.3% of their quotation, and the number 1 book that was quoted by the founders was the Bible, 34%. They really knew their Bible. So to understand whether or not you're a Jew or a Christian, you have to understand the Bible a little bit to understand the design of the Constitution. Some of the books they use, Deuteronomy, Romans, and Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's us, I guess. And from this flaw came the checks and balances mindset of Washington, Adams, and Hamilton, according to what they wrote to others, which is we have to have checks and balances because we know that men are difficult. Montesquieu, of course, showed them with his design how to have checks and balances, and because of this story, which is the 10 Commandments, the founders said, we've got to write it down. We've got to write it down, because even God had to write down the rules because the Jews were misbehaving out there. And Moses comes back and said, okay, here's the rule book now. Well, they wanted to have a rule book because when you put things in writing, it's very powerful versus when you do not. So in questions of power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man whose nature is broken, but bind him down from mischief by the chain. Even Jefferson bind him down from mischief, you know, and he was probably the most wild founder, wouldn't you say? So Republican government, not democratic government. Separation of powers, this is what we have. Now then, and I know you want me to talk about Delaware. You're right here, by the way. So there were 9 small states in terms of population and 4 large. Virginia had 750,000 people. This is at the Constitutional Convention. Georgia had 1/10. Delaware had about 58,000, and Rhode Island fewer than that. Rhode Island did not even send delegates to the Constitutional Convention, because they thought Jimmy Madison and George Washington are coming to Philadelphia, the largest city, in order to take over the government. We weren't even going to participate in this thing. I have this just for you. This is Gunning Bedford, a delegate from Delaware. I do not, gentlemen, trust you. You gravely allege that there is no danger of combination. The larger states you say will be rivals one another. He's saying this to the floor of the Constitutional Convention, one of those 116 days. This language is calculated only to amuse us. Yes, the larger states will be rivals, but not against each other. They'll be rivals against the rest of the states. So nice to be with you here. This was the mindset. But Madison's Virginia plan failed. And so did William Patterson's New Jersey plan. And the great compromise is why we have a constitution at all, which is Roger Sherman from Connecticut, the Connecticut Compromise, and there's Madison. They agreed every state gets 2 senators, and the House will be by population. Madison wanted both House and Senate to be by population, because he had the most people. But he stuck around. To his credit, he didn't leave town. The last week of the Constitutional Convention, they hadn't decided how to elect a president. They had debated it, but nobody agreed on anything. So they had the Committee of 11 have a meeting. This was Hamilton, Madison, Gouverneur Morris, James Wilson, and a few others. And they came back and said, they had debates and they took a vote and they said, should we have a popular election of our president? Only one of the delegates voted. It was from Philadelphia, the largest city. One delegate voted for that. That was it. Nobody else. The other 50-some did not want it. Election by Congress. Well, the problem there will be the president will be a toady, will be a tool of the Congress, and they have no independence. Remember what Montesquieu and Aristotle had told them was you have to have checks and balances. You have to have an executive that checks the Congress and appoints the courts with the approval of the Senate, and on and on. We know how that goes. So election by the states. Let's have the states vote, and we will aggregate those together. And yes, they voted for this, although 3 southern states, North and South Carolina and Georgia, those delegates voted against the Electoral College. Some people say it was about slavery, but the Southerners were not so happy with this idea at the beginning, but they then warmed to the idea. Washington had never spoke on the floor of the convention, but he would say to the delegates during that 116 days, during their meals, have you ever been on a ship in a storm without a captain? Because for 7 years, I led the revolution against the British, and I had 13 captains in the Articles of Confederation, the Continental Congress, and I couldn't get anybody to agree on anything, so I was navigating the 13 as well as I was navigating the British. We need to have a commander-in-chief when the ship of state's in trouble, right? And so we got in our Constitution not only a chief executive, but a commander-in-chief. And of course, we're thankful for that because we need to, especially in wartime or national emergency, to have a leader. So the Electoral College is not a problem. It was a solution to their problem, which is how do we have a president independent of the Congress and a check on that and to do other important things. Now, 1860, there were 4 people running for president. This was the run-up to the Civil War. We had 2 Democrats, Stephen Douglas from Illinois, the Lincoln Douglas debates, Breckinridge from Kentucky, and independent Mr. Bell, and then Lincoln. And a lot of people didn't have, in those days, the ballots were all given by the parties, and then you would actually turn in the ballot. There was no ballot you checked on. It was sort of, and there weren't a lot of flyers in the South for Lincoln. So Lincoln didn't get a lot of votes in the South because there was no Republican Party there. So he only got 39.8% of the vote, the lowest plurality of any American president we've ever had. 40% of the vote, just about. But he won 18 of the 33 states. And were states' rights important then? Are you kidding? We were going to fight a war on that. And so he was seen as legitimate, and that's why the South started to leave, because they thought he did get a mandate, and he's Mr. House divided against itself cannot stand, his famous speech when he was a younger guy. Now, some people say, well, the Electoral College is all about the Republican Party. Since 1904, we've had 15 Democrat and 15 Republican presidents. So, it is not a Democrat or Republican thing, it is a constitutional thing. And that shows us how divided we've been for so long, my gosh. So we have the checks and balances in our system, and we know that. But remember, the founders lived in the Newtonian age. All right? And Newton had, among other things, one of my favorite laws, which is the second law of triangles. And if you can understand that, let me know. I have no idea what this is. But which is the strongest figure? We know the strongest is the triangle. That's why our bridges are truss bridges. The triangle has equal strength at each of the 3 points. And so the checks and balances are sort of like that. We have concurrent majorities. So we have a bill passes the House. Is it a law? No. House and Senate? No. The president has to sign it. So we have 3 majorities. So people say, I'm for the majority. I say, yes, 3 times. 3 times. And that's why we're free. This checks and balances is why we're free. The court system is the same thing. Before you lose your life or your property or your freedom, you can lose in the district court, you go to the appellate court, and then the Supreme Court. We have a triangle here as well in our justice system. And of course, when we elect the president, we have 50 Democratic votes. Then we go to the state capitals a month later. There's 2 electors here. Michelle is the presidential elector here, and where's the other gentleman? Oh, they sit together. You see, they're already kind of. This is a bit of a cabal, okay, right here. Sir, you're in the middle. Rick, keep your eye on those 2 points. Okay. So, and then we go to the Congress, in the early January, which has become sort of a popular thing to talk about, I guess, these days. But look, companies and nonprofits have this too. IBM Corporation, they have management, but they have a board of directors, they have outside auditor, they have shareholders, so you have triangles. Wherever you have this separation of powers and triangles of liberty, you have transparency and robust human relationship. When you have a concentration of power, this is when you get in trouble, right? So let's talk about Europe. How many countries in Europe there are? How many countries in Europe?
27.
27. Okay, very good. We have a winner. It's like bingo, isn't it? Sort of. Okay. And here they are. They every year the 27 heads of government. These are heads of government. Now they're kings or queens. These are heads of government. They get together for a meeting. They take a picture, and it's required by law that they all wear the blue outfits. And you'll see Mrs. Merkel way over here. This is why she's no longer chancellor, because she wore the red outfit. And they really, you gotta do the blue outfit. So, of these 27, how many are elected by a national popular vote that the left is so in love with? How many of the 27? Cyprus, which is like Club Med, right? And France. That's it. The other 25, they don't do it that way. They're not democratic at all. Why is that? Well, because this didn't work out very well, did it? They had the French Revolution, then they had the Parliament and the Constitution, then they got Napoleon from 1801 to 1815, and then they went right back to the Bourbons. This is why Tocqueville comes to America to write Democracy in America. Why is it that we had a king, we got rid of it, and now we're back with the kings, and the Americans are just every 4 years electing their head of government? That's why he wrote that book for us to read. The French never read it. By 1848, there were 30 countries in Europe having revolutions against their monarchs. There was a potato famine, other problems. It's a hinge moment in history, as Kissinger would say. This is the Electoral College of Germany. Mrs. Merkel was never on the ballot of all Germans, just her own constituency, right? The Electoral College of Spain. Great Britain. Churchill was never on the ballot of all Englishmen, only his own constituency. I could do 25, I won't, but I'll do 25 of these and you'll see we are so much more democratic than the Europeans. We have 50 popular votes in our states. They don't do that in Europe or elsewhere in the country. This is Canada. They have no parliament up there, apparently. Okay? And this is their head of the parliament. I always hear mumbles about this guy. There must be a trucker in the room. I don't know. But anyway, his party in 2021, there's 6 parties there, by the way, got 33% of the vote. Remember Lincoln was 39.8? There's nobody in Europe, Prime Minister today, that has 39% of the vote. Mrs. Moroni in Italy got 25% of the vote. Almost every Prime Minister has 25, 30, 35% of the vote. Our lowest plurality president ever is higher than any European head of government. It's because they're all in these coalition governments here. The conservatives got more votes, but they got more seats, okay? Now, these are heads of government by parliament, This is Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, just like the Europeans. Norway, India, Morocco, Singapore. And yet the left, oh, the majority must rule. I really love the majority. So what I say to my audience is, if you'll take out a pen and a piece of paper, I'm going to show you the countries that have national popular vote for their head of government, because I know you're on a vacation there. Okay, so you ready for your vacation plans? These are the places: Iran, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Russia, Afghanistan, Mexico, Turkey, Zimbabwe. They all have national popular vote. Isn't that great? The Democrats want to, sorry, I'm not partisan, but there is a party in the country that wants to have a national popular vote. Now let's talk about baseball, because I know you're a little tired of the civics thing. So let's talk about baseball. Pirates, we have a Pirate fan? Is that what's going on? Okay, you know about what's going on here, Bill?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
The walk-off?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's a great. So it was 3-3, and the Pirates. It was the bottom of the ninth. The Yankees had 2 on. They were or 2 runs. They were ahead. 2 balls, 2 strikes against Mazeroski. They struck him out. They would win the World Series. But what does he do? There's 2 people on base. He hits a home run. It's called the walk-off home run. It's famous among 2 people that are baseball fans. They would go later and have a beer and just talk about Mazeroski, who also lives in Boca with Cesar Rodney. Okay, so I say, is that fair? 4 games to 3. Everybody says, that's how it is. Best out of 7, right? Did you know in that World Series, the Pirates had a total of 27 runs and the Yankees had 55 runs, twice as many? My gosh, is that fair? Well, the Super Bowl, is it the most points or the most games? The March Madness, apparently that's basketball. Okay, it's the most games, not the most points. They don't have the points, they have the most games. All sports are about the most games, just like we're the most states. All right, we've only had 2 presidents that didn't win the presidency with the majority of states. That's Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. But the National Popular Vote Compact is out there, and 17 state legislatures have passed it. They're trying to run an end run, and it's not from China, it's from California. That's who came up with it, a bunch of California, very wealthy people. This is our country by population. Delaware is where we where is it? It's there somewhere. 9 of our states have half of our people, and it's not Iowa. Okay, Iowa, just so you know, this is where they grow a lot of corn here. New York City has more people than 39 of our states. Los Angeles County has more people than 41 of our states. And this is our population, if seen from something Elon Musk put up in the air, right? This is where our people live. In yellow, we have 50% of our counties, 142, and in blue, the rest of the country, 3,001 counties. We are very much a coastal country with our population right around like this. Well, this is Clinton versus Trump. She won 487 counties. He won 2,626. And it's the same math, pretty much. But 17 all one-party legislatures have passed the National Popular Vote Compact, which says no matter how the voters in our state vote for president, whoever wins the National Popular Vote, as I guess calculated by CNN or CBS, because there is no National Popular Vote official count, we will tell our electors to vote for that person even if it's against the will of the state. That's what they're pushing. And 17 legislatures, including the governor of Minnesota, who signed that bill, is for that. And to save our states, my small group, or 5 of us, we work against that. Passage of this, House, Senate, and Governor has been all in one party. 99% of the state legislators that voted for this thing are of one party. I'm not supposed to be partisan, but that's a fact, right? So this is a former governor, I don't know if you remember him or not, but a national administration attempting to make all laws for the whole nation to inevitably result in the dissolution of the Union itself. Home rule in the states is fundamental necessity to remain a united country. Even he, as governor, realized, this was a radio address he did about federalism. It's quite an interesting talk. His party today would, of course, deny he was ever a Democrat, I imagine. This is the election of 1896, one of your favorite elections. And you see, this is McKinley. Look at the Republican has all this, and the Democrat has this blue. But look at this in 2016. The Republican is where the Democrats were, and the Democrats, the whole country is flipped. And so, gosh, if you think we have swing states, just wait a few decades and everything will change. Now, this is Los Angeles County. These cars actually don't move anymore. They live in these cars. There's a little refrigerator in the front seat, and the back seat, they sleep there, and the internet access. And they get out once in a while, they talk to their neighbors, and they do pretty much business. This is their life, and God bless them. They really like it down there in Los Angeles. But this is a different planet, isn't it? It's a very different place. They have a different view of what it's like to be an American, what we ought to do as Americans. This is an island, apparently. Part of New York City, Manhattan here, and they have a park. And how many acres? How many acres in that park?
843.
She knows a lot of these. So I like to ask New Yorkers, well, how many of these acres, 843, are farm? Oh no, we walk our dogs there. We jog there. We play baseball there. We're farming. That involves animals and dirt on your face. No, we don't do that here in New York City. And yet, look at this is a Manhattan Whole Foods, and it's full of food. How about that? My gosh. Well, that's why we start our primaries in New Hampshire. Because they feed the cities. And if the cities ruled all the time, they would be serfs. And will 30 of our states be serfs to the other the population centers? I don't think they will. They probably say, get your own corn on the cob, farm. And if Central Park was farm, because it has all those acres, according to the Department of Agriculture, it takes 5 acres to feed each of us for a year. They could feed, with Central Park, if it was all farm, 127 people. So it means another 9 million would have to go someplace else for their food. Our second primary, don't you love this guy? Free advice for presidential candidates. Don't you love this? This is very American, And here he is. He's got his winter coat on. He's ready for anything. And this is what it looks like up there in New Hampshire, our second primary. Here's Ronald Reagan. I bought this. I paid for this microphone. John B. Anderson, a baker. There's Dole. Here's George W. Bush. Here's how do you describe this man? He's just exuberant. She's not so happy. I think Mrs. Clinton was a little unhappy that day being there with these people. And then George W. Bush, of course. So this is, I asked the governor a year ago when I was in the same room with him, Governor Sununu of New Hampshire, who's the outgoing governor, why is the New Hampshire primary important? To which he said, because people in New Hampshire can tell a fake across the table. And so in New Hampshire, everybody has about 4 meals with each presidential candidate before they decide, because they can tell a fake. And of course, in Iowa, it's the same thing. They have state fairs, and you have to eat something, Oreos fried, and just all the kind of things they eat there. Who knows? But after those 2 primaries, what do we get? This. We get screens. We get people on stages with news people that are really news people, right? But this is what we get, and whether party it is. Once we get rid of the retail, we go to the wholesale, and the whole thing is very different. Now, we're going to end with the 2 basic industries, agriculture and mining. Everything in this room comes from mining. Everything. The chairs, the light bulbs, everything comes from mining something. And then, of course, you're going to have food a little later and drink. That comes from agriculture. So these are the top 2 things. And I don't think anybody in downtown New York does this kind of work. I've been to New York and I haven't seen it anyway. This is where we get our wheat, not from New York or LA. This is the largest iron ore mine in the United States. And when I got out of college, I was a foreman in this East Peoria, Illinois factory. We built bulldozers. I was asked after a while not to do this because our tractors were having a lot of trouble. So now I do this kind of stuff. But this is and of course Cummins Engine, who was I talking to? Bob about, he supplies parts for them from Delaware and from Cummins Engine. I was just in Indiana last week talking about them. Major oil and gas fields, this is where they come from, not from Florida or California. Each state makes a valuable contribution, very different contribution. Now, this is a cartoon from about 15 years ago. This is a cartoon about these are the swing states. You see, they were making fun of the Electoral College because Colorado used to be a swing state. Florida used to be a swing state. Virginia used to be. Ohio used to be. And Iowa used to be. Now they're not swing states. We have other states that are swing states now. It's North Carolina and Georgia and Michigan. You see, so it changes. These states are on the move. But we'll end with a positive story, which is the sinking of the Titanic. I know you were hoping after the baseball story we'd have the Titanic, right? All right. So, as you'll recall, if you've seen the movie, once they hit the iceberg, the captain calls in his senior staff, and one of the people he calls in was a guy that was actually on the ship who designed the Titanic and died in that. But he lays out the blueprint and he says, you know, to save money, we did not finish the tops of the compartments because we didn't think anything would ever break through the hull, but it has. And so in 2 hours and 30 minutes, this ship will sink. And he was right. He calculated and he was right. He knew his ship and he knew it was going to sink because the compartments were not sealed. Well, the National Popular Vote Compact would sink the Republic. This was, you remember this, the Florida recount, the hanging Chaz and all that was 24 years ago now, but you remember, this fellow now, he lives in Italy, okay? He's left Florida because nobody will talk to him, really. But you remember what happened was 49 states stood back and we let the Floridians work this out, right? Because the compartments were all sealed. We didn't have to have a national popular vote. We just had to recount Florida. But just think if we had a national popular vote and there was any kind of adjudication at all, some court would say we've got to count the whole thing again. And how many would really think we could ever get through that? If we even could do it and then get through the litigation, it'd take 4 years to get another president. But the Electoral College, the compartments are sealed. The states are sealed, just like Florida was. Whether it's 13 states or 50 states, a rich inheritance, the Electoral College is a big part of this. 39 men signed the Constitution. It's been amended 27 times and they won a national popular vote. Let us see if they get 38 states to agree to that. I don't think they will do that. And don't interfere with anything in the Constitution that must be maintained, for it's the only safeguard of our liberties. Thank you. And if we have questions, we'll hear those now. Thank you.